Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kelly, for giving us that great segue into these additional topics I'd like to discuss with regards to sprouted ingredients, sprouted grains specifically. So we'll talk through sprouting, what changes occur from germination, enhanced bioavailability, and then we'll transition to food industry uses of sprouted grains, growing popularity, functional attributes, so forth. And we'll round that out with a discussion on how to capture consumers, what attributes to highlight in our marketing. So sprouting, I love this description of it. It's a positive form of processing. So often, processing methods are stripping nutritional content from our foods. This is a form of natural processing of grains that, in fact, can enhance the nutritional attributes of foods. It's a traditional method of food preparation that's finding a modern-day resurgence as a superfood trend. And a sprouted grain, in its essence, is a germinated seed. So it's a seed. I talk with my hands, so I'm going to set this down here. A seed is, germination is awakening the seed from its dormant state. So germination itself is initiated by proper conditions of temperature and moisture. It causes enzymatic reactions and a cascade of chemical reactions within the seed. So they begin to structurally change the seed internally. The amount of time that the seed is subject to these conditions will determine whether a visible sprout will emerge and the length of that sprout ultimately. The length of sprouting time has direct impact on the nutritional attributes of the seed, and we can see those attributes to be quite extreme depending on the length of sprouting. And I'd like to give an example of that, actually. So if we are to consider a wheat berry that has an emergent sprout, and then we consider wheat grass, like we're virtually looking at two entirely different foods. So there's a broad spectrum in the physiological changes that are going to take place from day 1 to say day 9, or all the way through to this growth of greenery on our sprouts. So the effects of sprouting. It's essentially the beginning phases of digestion of that seed. So the seed itself is beginning to metabolize its nutrient stores and breaking down of macronutrients to propagate growth. So for instance, larger protein structures are broken down into their amino acid constituents and so forth. What we see when seeds are sprouted are reduced anti-nutrients, so phytic acids, tannins, lectins. We see an increase in bioavailability of micronutrients, so phosphorus, iron, zinc, calcium, magnesium, manganese, potassium, folic acid, to name a few. And these are just some of the widely documented nutritional components. There are many more that we aren't even yet aware of or studying. We see an increased presence of antioxidants, specifically vitamin E and C. Increased protein. I'd like to kind of elaborate on this point a bit. So the essential amino acids actually increase. So when we're breaking down these protein structures, it's not necessarily only about protein content and quantity, but also quality of the proteins that are then available for our absorption. We also see increased fiber content. So that's kind of like the overarching changes of sprouting or effects of sprouting, and these are a couple of points directly from some of the research I looked at. So these are more or less examples. Phenolic content in brown rice flour increased by 28% after 48 hours of sprouting. Germination for 24 hours increased total free amino acids by 4.5 times in finger millet. We see some changes in fatty acid profiles. So omega-6 fatty acids increased in sprouting of brown rice after 3 days. This next example is a bit unique because, again, it's showing you the extremes in very long sprouting time, right? So this study, omega-3 fatty acids were shown to increase significantly in sprouted wheat, but that is a study that took wheat and sprouted it for 9 days. So we're looking at a food that is maybe not going to be eaten as a grain at this point. But the reason I put this example in here is because, once again, so many physiological changes are taking at each point in the sprouting process. So this is just to show you what that extremity is. Also, this study doesn't break down on which day we saw that increase in omega-3 fatty acids. So it could have happened at day 1, 2, 3, or 9. Phytic acid. So phytic acid reduction of 45% in sorghum after 48 hours of germination, reduction of 27% of phytic acid in brown rice after 48 hours. Pearl millet, after 24 hours, we saw a reduction of more than 50%. So these are pretty significant changes in the phytic acid presence. So let's look closer at phytic acid now. I like to think of phytic acid as a nutrient storage locker that requires a key for us to open. It is, in its essence, it is a storage form of phosphorus, and it tightly binds essential micronutrients. These micronutrients are in this storage locker to fuel the growth of the seed. So the seed is keeping them protected for its own use, for its own proliferation. And so once we break that phytic acid open with phytase, these bound nutrients become available for us to digest. Let's see here. Where am I? I think I covered everything there. Oh, it's often referred to as an anti-nutrient. So sources of phytase to break into this phytic acid molecule and harness all of these valuable micronutrients, it's present naturally in different compartments of the seed already. So it's waiting for its call to action, so to speak, to break down the phytic acid in the seeds. Once again, it's waiting to be utilized by the seed to make these nutrients available for its own growth. We also see a microbial phytase. Yeast actually has phytase in it. Phytase generated by the mucosa of the small intestine, I found some studies that showed that we don't do this, we don't produce this, and other studies show that we have a very, very insufficient amount of phytase activity happening in our small intestine. So I think that the takeaway that I gathered was that it's a negligible amount in terms of digestion or helping us break down phytase. And then there's also gut-associated microflora. And again, that would impact the nutritional, the mineral bioavailability, because a lot of these micronutrients that I'm specifically referring to increasing in sprouting are absorbed in the small intestine. So sources. Here's the parallel, the unique parallel of phytic acid, and I think this is less often discussed. There are a lot of potential therapeutic benefits associated with phytate consumption. So some of those potential effects, it exhibits antioxidant properties. We see anti-cancer properties, variety of different forms of cancer through many different mechanisms, which I will not go into, but there is research out there showing benefits of phytic acid. Promotion of DNA repair, limits site-specific DNA damage, anti-proliferative effect on tumor cells. It has the ability to chelate and inactivate pro-oxidant metals, so that's also very interesting. And then there was I came across some interesting research with regards to blood glucose and insulin response. So some of those attributes of whole grains that contribute to better management of diabetes or prevention of diabetes, it's interesting to think that phytic acid may be playing into that response as well. Lectins. So I found less research on lectins and what's happening in terms of our actual digestion with them. So this is just to give us kind of a general idea, nothing too conclusive here. So they are carbohydrate-binding proteins, abundant in grains and legumes, more abundant in legumes than the grains. Many different lectins with many different functions because they bind different carbohydrates. They're said to be part of the plant's natural defense system to deter from being eaten. I think that this was kind of, I don't know, an interesting piece of information, is that they may have evolved as a way to keep seeds intact as they pass through the digestive tract. So if you're thinking of wild animals foraging and doing what they do in nature, and then the propagation of seed and life cycle, it's kind of interesting to think about. And then they are resistant to human digestion. So once again, jumping to the parallels of lectins, because they're often said to cause digestive discomfort or even potentially a negative immune response. They do exhibit antimicrobial effects. There are studies exploring therapeutic uses, very targeted therapeutic uses, that definitely warrant further exploration. So anti-tumor therapies, antiviral therapies. I actually found quite a bit of research on that. And then this is just to get us thinking in a different direction, because I don't want us to get stuck in the reductionist framework of lectins and phytic acid being all bad. I think it's nice to expand our thoughts into all sides of the scenario. So one of the thoughts that came to mind for me is, what if lectins are contributing to the control of our microbial population that exhibits negative health effects? What if it keeps that in check and positive, microbes with positive effect are then able to flourish? So it's just kind of an interesting thought. All right, so we're switching gear to food industry and commercial use. So taking that platform, the sort of nutritional differences we're seeing in sprouted grains, and then applying for commercial use. So we are seeing the presence of sprouted grains in the industry grow exponentially. Everyone from Starbucks and Panera, Kashi, they have products with sprouted grains, and they're marketing them. And we're seeing sales data for brands like Simple Mills. They're showing sales growth in areas where they're including sprouted ingredients. 1 Degree Organic Foods in Silver Hills, they have extensive lines that are marketing sprouted ingredients. And they've been around for, I think they said 20 or 30 years. And it's in the last 3 to 5 years that they've seen this exponential jump of interest in their sprouted products. And they've seen more than double growth in sales in the last 3 years alone. So something has changed in terms of consumer perception and market acceptance. And once again, this is just kind of an interesting, in terms of product innovation, this processing, negative processing versus this positive processing format, and consumer awareness to what's being done to their food, and looking for more nutritious options. So diverse culinary uses. I've just put a very, very small snapshot into the potential uses, but you get a different flavor profile in sprouted ingredients compared to their unsprouted counterparts, nuttier, earthier. That can be useful in culinary applications. Milled into flour and used in bakery items. I won't speak to the technicalities of baking with sprouted grains, because that is not my area of expertise. But there can be differences, both positive and negative. Sprouted grains, some can be ready to eat, like buckwheat and amaranth. After sprouting, we have them in, this is a little a sprouted topping blend, put it on yogurt, make granola recipes with it. It's a fun way for consumers to incorporate sprouted ingredients. Same goes for commercial products, like putting them in granola bars, cookies, cereals, and so forth. They can be put in their whole crunchy form, or, as I said, milled into flours. So functional attributes. So we've discussed the enhanced nutritional profile. This is one of my favorite little details, customized cooking time. So I've got Second Springs up here. They're the ones who taught me this. The unique thing about sprouting is the longer that a grain is sprouted, the less time it's going to require for cooking. So by understanding those effects, we have the ability to blend grains and legumes together that couldn't have otherwise been cooked in the same, bowl together. So, for instance, mung bean and brown rice, or quinoa and lentils, and then just grains themselves, different types of grains cooked together. So that's kind of fun from both a culinary perspective and then from a consumer convenience perspective. Degradation of gliadin peptides. The study that I looked at specifically for this, they were sprouting wheat for like 6 days. So again, we have to really think about what we're doing and if that food's still eaten as a grain at that point. But it is kind of interesting that further research should be done in terms of people who have gluten sensitivities, and maybe we're making it a bit friendlier for their digestion by sprouting. Potential increase in shelf life. This is a really exciting detail to me. This is anecdotal and theoretical, and again, this is information from Second Spring or Everspring Farms. Sometimes they will see shelf life be greater in a sprouted counterpart. I'll use a non-grain example. Chia seeds, their sprouted chia seeds have a longer shelf life than their unsprouted chia seeds, but they see it in some grains as well. Again, anecdotal, but certainly warrants further exploration. This is a specific example of bread that was made in the study. They made multiple loaves of bread with germinated brown rice flour, more polyphenol content and increased antioxidant, and they specifically recommended it for better protection against oxidation. So this is going to help us deliver to the consumer products with more nutritional integrity and less oxidation. Industrial production, just a couple of quick notes or food for thought again. This goes along with Kelly's presentation about defining what a sprouted grain actually is, but manufacturing should be standardized to a degree as well, because nutritional attributes are impacted at that phase quite significantly. And I like to give this kind of example or pose this question with regards to the degree with which we're soaking these seeds and what is lost in the wastewater from that soaking process, because polyphenols is one example. They're water soluble, and other nutrients certainly are lost when water is drained. So kind of standardizing the best way to keep most nutrients intact in the grain. Pathogenic control, I think that this is something that comes up, or a thought that comes up for we're creating the optimal conditions to perpetuate bacterial growth when we're creating appropriate conditions for sprouting. So some of the ways to kind of mitigate those points of contamination, testing the grains before they go into sprouting to make sure that contamination isn't present. Manufacturers do have in place ways to organically sanitize grains that will be ready to eat. So that does exist without destroying the nutritional integrity of those ingredients. And then most sprouted grains are cooked anyways before consumption, and that's another point where we're controlling any contamination. So rounding this out with marketing and commercializing, how do we communicate to the consumer? How do we, sprouted ingredients can be more expensive for a manufacturer to purchase, so how do we make that worthwhile investment? Where do we see that return? Consumer education is going to be key here. So some of the areas that brands that have sprouted ingredients are seeing the biggest impact is in communicating benefits of digestive ease, communicating the enhanced nutritional attributes, and then convenience. And it has also been demonstrated that the formats with which we're reaching these consumers to be most effective are ways where we can have more in-depth conversations with the customers, with the consumers. So blog posts, newsletters, video tutorials. Again, it's really coming down to the education component. So pulling it all together, sprouting is a form of positive processing. We do see nutritional advantage. It's going to be very interesting to, as research continues on the topic, to see where we can harness, where we can capture the greatest nutritional benefit of these sprouted ingredients, at what sprouting time and optimal conditions. And then standardizing manufacturing practices, and of course, defining what a sprout actually is, what a sprouted grain actually is. And consumers are becoming more aware. The market is primed for this. Retailers are more apt to bring a product with sprouted ingredients into their stores. So I think this is a really exciting time to see sprouted ingredients flourish in the mainstream, and offers another diverse way to enjoy whole grains.